The man that's rooted in himself can let things pass by and realizes that no matter how much money you make, no matter how beautiful your relationship, no matter how healthy and in your prime you are, that's all going to change, all going to come and it's going to go and it's going to come again and it's going to eventually be taken from you. And so there's a realization when you begin to go internal that that place of awareness is what you are. In the dojo, we spoke about it more as a awareness of being here, but you could also speak about it in awareness of heart or of love, of radiance. And we're here to either recognize what we are, the spark of our heartbeat, and transmit that through our loving, through our purpose, or we're lost thinking that if we get something, then we'll feel that thing. And that's often coming from a more of an adolescent place of, I want the goodies, I want the shiny things, I want people to look at me, or whatever the attitude might be.
Welcome to the Heart of Man podcast, a podcast for any man seeking to live in alignment with his deepest core and lead a life of profound meaning and connection. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and I'm here to empower you through transformative conversations, eye-opening insights, and practical wisdom. Join me now as we venture into the heart of man. Let's dive in. Every man has a capacity to cultivate a depth of presence that commands and quiets a room. A clear confidence with heartfelt structure and passionate depth, and a conscious engagement with purpose that honors both doing and being. An embodied wildness that transcends the walls of a home and the constraints of a busy schedule. We're taught to achieve outward success, but no matter how well you do, eventually you'll reach a point where something is still missing, where all that you have achieved is simply not enough. Reclaiming what is missing requires a commitment to a new journey, a deeper exploration than most men are willing or able to make on their own. These are the words that you'll find on Eli Buren's website, who's our latest guest on the podcast. These words beautifully describe the essence of what Eli brings through his work by leading groups and individuals into their core being, where pristine presence, powerful passion, and true purpose naturally emerges. I first became exposed to Eli and his work at the beginning of this year by attending his 3-month men's container, the Dojo, where we were guided into in-depth teachings on martial forms, deep meditation, and other embodied presence practices. These ultimately supported us in developing our capacity to meet our lives and the world with cultivated strength, sensitivity, openness, and depth. From my first experience with Eli, I was awe-inspired by his capacity to command a space while also sharpening each individual in the room towards deeper presence, depth, and consciousness. So it's an absolute honor to have him on the show today. This conversation came at the completion of the dojo and served as an exploration around the importance of cultivating presence and depth, how this may support us in our lives, and what it actually means to lead our lives with a sense of devotion and responsible agency. We also had an interesting exploration around expanding range, whether it's from softness to fierce strength, fluidity to structure, or play to responsibility, among many other valuable topics. It was an absolute pleasure for me to have this conversation with Eli, someone I see as a dear teacher and mentor, and I'm confident that you will receive a lot of value from our interview together. And now, let's jump into the show. All right, everybody, welcome back to yet another episode at the Heart of Man. This is an episode that I feel incredibly excited for, and it's an absolute honor for me to have Eli Buren on the podcast. Eli is a seasoned practitioner with, I believe, over 25 years of experience and with in-depth training and embodied presence, yogic embodiment, sexual yoga, martial arts, and somatic studies, outdoor leadership. And I actually just came through a 3-month container with Eli called the Dojo, which was an incredibly profound experience for me. We actually closed it off just yesterday. So it feels like an absolute honor for me just to sit here and to take some of these elements into our conversation today. Eli, I welcome you to the podcast.
Hello, Alex. Good to be here with you. 12 hours apart.
That's it. That's it. Eli, one of the things that I would love to just initiate our conversation with is you called this 3-month container the dojo. But one of the things that you communicated within our last sitting is that the real dojo is really about the dojo of awareness, dojo of attention. And it's like a lifelong dojo that we are constantly in. Can you speak a little bit more about that and what that means to you?
Yeah. I mean, so whether it's a 3-month container, whether it's 3 years, whether you have 3 days to go on retreat, generally the experience when you go deep is that you touch a certain place of awareness, of body, of heart. And those places, then we have the responsibility, if we're practicing, to carry those into our life. And we could call them threads. So there's threads that we either forget about and get distracted by all of the 10,000 things, or we hold them close as we go about our life and as we get shaped by the sources and the, sometimes excruciating, sometimes incredibly pleasurable, as Bali is quite often. And so what I was speaking about in the dojo is we called it a dojo of awareness, meaning that we met for 3 months, but the place that we met was timeless. It's a place of awareness that is influenced by the room we're in. You and I are both, meeting in 2 specific rooms. You can see them. And whoever's listening to this is in a room somewhere, driving in a car, sitting somewhere, listening on an airplane. And yet where we're meeting is another room, and it's a room of awareness that is both here and now, but also timeless. So we could leave that specific container of the dojo that all of us men participated in. And yet the capacity to touch back to that place is holding the thread. So holding a thread of, that place where I trust my body, where I'm aware of my breath, where there's a clarity and an openness in my mind, in my heart, in my belly, that is timeless. That's something that we either are practicing or we're not. And someone can be in a dojo like we were in, or in a specific room where people are sparring and doing all kinds of things, and they can be more or less in that place. So you can be in a practice room and be elsewhere and not really in the moment, not really holding that thread. So that's what I was referring to, is that we were learning how to come back to, first of all, to recognize, then to come back to, and then to honor and build our life in a way that keeps that place as pristine, as honorable as you would a temple or a dojo.
There's a lot of threads that I could pull from what you've just spoken of. And on an embodied level, I've experienced what it is that you're communicating. And I'm noticing this desire to pull in some of the listeners who may have not had this experience that we had, and give them a little bit more of an understanding of what it is that you're speaking to. And I guess the one thing that really stood out for me is that this dojo of awareness, this meeting point, was really a place where we could come into deeper contact with each other. And it appears to me that it's the place where from which we can more deeply relate to each other, but also to ourselves, with I'm going to say, a wider recognition of who we really are beyond just like our thought forms and the things that we get lost by and stuck by. But to kind of bring it back to a question for any listeners who may not be as familiar with what you're communicating, why is this important to you? Why do you believe this is important specifically, for a lot of the male listeners who come on the show?
Yeah. First of all, because if we follow the forces of the marketplace, the algorithm, the common distractions that are pulling you away from the inner world, the inner knowing, the actual body, pulling you to some other place, virtual, past, future, or really pulling you away from your agency, from your own sense of trust. I'm here. I trust my body. I trust the way I'm meeting my relationship. Even if I make a mistake, even if I trip, even if I hurt someone, I trust that I will clean it up and I will learn. So it's important to me because the common man that's just following what's in front of him on the surface, in the surface world, is missing that whole part of his reality. He's missing the deeper roots of who he is, and being basically, I mean, if we could speak about it this way, there's a manipulating force to the marketplace that if you don't trust yourself and your root has been cut, and so you're just sort of floating and grabbing and thinking if you get this, then you'll be happy, or you'll feel successful, or whatever you want to feel. You'll feel the love. Then you're easy to manipulate into basically have anything put in front of you and you're going to grab for it. The man that's rooted in himself can let things pass by and realizes that no matter how much money you make, no matter how beautiful your relationship, no matter how healthy and in your prime you are, that's all going to change. That's all going to come, and it's going to go, and it's going to come again, and it's going to eventually be taken from you. And so there's a realization when you begin to go internal that place of awareness is what you are. And that we can, in the dojo, we spoke about it more as a awareness of being here, but you could also speak about it in awareness of heart or of love, of radiance. And we're here to either recognize what we are, the spark of our heartbeat, and transmit that through our loving, through our purpose, or we're lost thinking that if we get something, then we'll feel that thing. And that's often coming from a more of an adolescent place of, I want the goodies, I want the shiny things, I want people to look at me, or whatever the attitude might be. So it's important for that sense. And then the second reason that I would say is it's just a simple bow back to life, bow back to the web of wherever we're born from. I mean, we're like brought into this place, and on the most simple level, it's saying thank you, to recognize in someone, to be here and present to that awareness. It doesn't mean you pull out of your life. It means that you are able to perceive it and then move within it and feel the gristling of age and all of it with more detail. So you can't escape this place. Like, there's no solving it, but you can meet it and be stretched by it more artfully, which is in a way saying, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Very well said. And I'm trying to keep a bookmark to particular subject matters that I would love to get a little bit more into, but noticing as well this longing to bring it into the personal as well, and really recall these moments when I was in my young 20s, when I was really initiated more into the internal path. And at that time, how, I'm going to say, fragile and vulnerable I really felt, in the sense of constantly being dragged down by distractions and being pulled in all forms of different directions, because I lacked a sense of solidity. I lacked a sense of grounding of who I really am, what is really my worth. But there was as well a lot of, I'm going to say, like, trauma that ultimately was alive for me that didn't allow me to feel safe within my body. It shot me up in my head, or it led to me to completely dissociate from my sensory experience. And so naturally, there was a lot more vulnerability of being pulled and dragged in all kinds of different directions. And it was only when I started exploring this, and for me, the beginning was in many ways more meditative practices. But I'm going to say the thing that really changed a lot for me was exploring this layer and this area of embodiment, initiating more from a yogic background. So, like, becoming a yoga teacher and everything. But something that really supported me very deeply as well was exploring these realms of yogic intimacy. And they really allowed me to stretch my nervous system to really come back to what is happening here. I feel called to ask you, why is embodiment so important? And for anyone who doesn't yet know this term, what does it mean to you?
Well, it's where the conversation's really happening, at least the one that's time dependent. There's a start and there's a finish. So perhaps there's a conversation in the mind or outside of body time, a conversation of souls or a conversation of something else. But we're here as a body, and that is the roots of the conversation. And it's not saying that the mind and the intellect isn't important. It's saying that that's a part of us. It's a tool, but when it's used to escape the body, because the body's full of experiences, as you were describing, that everyone has versions of that, whether they're acute, big T trauma, or whether they're just experiences of loss or heartbreak, or, just look around you, just feel, even just experiences of what's happening to the world and people in wars, down the street, numbed out on a television, safe, but no one home. So if you actually feel, then it's painful. The body is like, I don't want to be there. And so when the mind is used to escape this experience, then we're really missing the variables of our life that I believe we're here to navigate, and we're here to transform. We could look at it as a kind of alchemical vessel, our body, our lives. And there's, potency poured in with conception. There's trauma poured in. There's toxicities of our lives poured in. There's teachings of great teachers poured in. There's all these things being poured into this vessel. And when we begin to become more embodied consciously and learn how to contain our experience through sitting, and even just maintaining an erect spine, open eyes, soft face, soft belly, relaxed pelvic floor, and breathing, which is, I'm saying just, but that's a lifetime of practice that most people will have no idea about. And so when we're able to cultivate that container, then there's an alchemical process that it's happening anyways, whether we're conscious of it or not. But when we're conscious of it, you can begin to turn the toxicities or the intense traumatic gripping of something that shouldn't have happened, but it did. And so it's like you can either pull out of it and feel like that should not have happened. That's like, I don't trust life. Or you can begin to feel the pain of it and the hurt and realize that that's part of this place. And then it begins to transform, and those intense, deep pains of our life can alchemically transform into gifts into a sensitivity that you may not have had if you hadn't have gone through that experience, a capacity to feel another person's suffering in a way that you wouldn't have if you hadn't really felt your own suffering. So because they become gifts that we are able to share with our community.
Beautifully said. And what really stands out for me is how in many ways we have not been supported to really transition or move into this process, especially for us as men. There's, societal narratives that we've been taught about how to be and who to be as men, which ultimately require us to disconnect from our sensory experience. But also, the big issue that comes with that is we as well don't feel safe, or we don't feel a sense of agency or even competence around what it is that's present. When you were speaking and sharing about, whether it's big T or little T trauma, there is going to be this experience of grief, hurt, anger, rage, whatever is there. But if we've never been initiated into learning how to be with that internal experience, naturally, we're just going to be like, well, fuck, I'm not going to do that. Like, let me just cut myself off of that because it's just so much easier. And I'm wondering, how do you, when you work with a man, how do you slowly engage and initiate a man into his own embodiment?
Well, look, first of all, whether someone's coming at it from, let's say there's a early life experience that's let's just say intense, and the result of that can look like hard to concentrate, not wanting to be in the body, disassociating a little bit, a little spaced out, as you were speaking to. It also can look like someone that's super on purpose, like a machine, go get it, like make the money, become successful. And that looks different, but it can be the same sense of, I don't want to be in here. There's something I don't want to feel. So let me go out into the world. And they're both really the same thing. One is more culturally accepted, but it's really important to realize that even if men listening to this that are like, they feel very successful and, in shape and all of these things, sometimes that blocks the trueness, the true spontaneity of your being. Too much muscles, it doesn't serve. Too full of a schedule doesn't allow you to feel the beauty of life. Just like too much playing and just surfing on the beaches of Bali and rolling around in the waterfalls also doesn't serve, because there's there's both sides of it. And when I work with men, it's a good question, because it's mysterious to me sometimes. I mean, there's specific technique that I use, but then you just go to the gym and build muscle and you're in the body. So it's obviously much more than that. And I think that on some fundamental level, like I was saying, the more that myself or somebody is able to really be with their experience with themselves, the hurts, the successes, all of it, there's something trustable. And so I think part of how I work with men is when men can feel that I've been gristled, but I'm still loving and open, like I'm able to transmit the experience of it actually looks good, like whatever that is. And not me, I look good, but there's something in it that men feel like, oh, I want to be more in my body. I want to feel more of that in my own way. It's never going to look like you or me or anyone else. It's going to look like them. And so that's an invitation in a non-verbal way. You see someone walking down the street and you can just feel all the things. You can feel their mental body, like how clear and how distracted. You can feel their emotional body. Like, do they feel available, or is there kind of a wall up? You can feel their physical body. Are they slumped over and not breathing and unaware of their surroundings, or are they open and looking around and moving with grace? You can feel their spiritual body. Is it focused in on the sense of me, me, or is it wide open, feeling the web? So those things we all intuitively feel, and I bring that into the room. And then when we specifically start to work with it, there's always both sides. You want to see where we're refusing the body. You want to see where we're blocking, like kind of kinking the hose of our vitality that's running through, whether that's our breath through, not having open channels, which is yogic. And so you start to look at where are the channels being restricted so that more of this vitality that's already flowing through us can flow more freely through an open system. And that's a whole lot of work right there. And then you can start to look at training specific ways of moving where you're focusing on learning, like as we did in the dojo, even just the simplicity of learning to raise your hands into a bow, which is what people have done throughout times and still do, but to actually bow in a way that your whole being, all four bodies are involved in that. And that's a real training. So that can take months and years to be able to bow in a way where someone feels like, wow, they're not imitating a Zen monk. They're not imitating a martial art master, but they're actually feeling those variables. They're feeling the meditative, they're feeling the precision, and that's living in their body, and it comes to the surface in the form of this gesture. And so that is a training of first practicing the gesture, the form, the asana, whatever we want to be practicing, repetition. And that's important. But then people get lost in the repetition and the need for it to look a certain way. So then you go deeper into the actual feeling, like the qualitative tone of the thing, which is what people really feel. That's what makes it delicious, is when you see someone and you can feel all that they put into it in their life, and you can sense that there's a mature, open human being behind that action.
A lot here. What really stands out for me is that it seems that if one doesn't engage in this type of training or work, I see that the place where the big challenges occur, especially for a lot of men, is more on the relational front of things. Whether it's in the relationship to themselves, whether it's in relationship to a partner, that's often when a man speaks to me, or it's in relationship to life, to something bigger, to their own aliveness. And it's ultimately when that stagnancy occurs, that loss of meaning, that loss of like aliveness, that I sense a lot of men are feeling pulled into this type of path. And the thing as well that I was reflecting on when I was hearing you speak is I've always enjoyed some form of like training. And for me, it wasn't just about the training, but it was more about what this training supported me with when I would enter my day-to-day experience, my life, and how it would actually support me. Like it's one thing to do like a yoga pose, and to really focus on, staying soft and breathing deeply and relaxing any of the tension that's present. But it's a whole nother thing to then apply it into one's life, when conflict occurs with your partner. Like, can you stay just as soft? Can you bring your awareness towards breathing? Can you not shoot into reactivity? And I think that is really what these practices are pointing to.
I definitely agree with that. And that's where, we have the term, that's where the rubber hits the road, is where you get to be thrown into life circumstance and have a real reality check of, are you living? So first of all, do you understand or do you forget? then are you able to feel your partner rather than just defend, and feel her or his experience? And it usually goes in that way. It's easiest to understand it, then to feel kind of takes a little more time, and then to actually let it be, is your body true to what you're speaking about? Are you still holding the asana? It doesn't have to look like a yoga asana, but the asana of openness. And that's the harder one to train. And that's another reason why we go towards embodiment, because we have 20, 30, 40, 50 years of conditioning of closure for the most part, unless you're fortunate and you started early, or you grew up in a family that was practicing something. And then you have your own set of things to work with also. But there's no escaping that process. So for many men, for many humans, sometime or another, it becomes unbearable. And I think for yourself, me, and for many of the people that are listening, you're aware, and you're practicing something. You've chosen to live a different life than was presented to you by the surface world, and you've chosen, and you're still navigating that. It's not easy. You get distracted. You still eat the things sometimes you shouldn't, and so you still have all that. But then there's the majority of humans that isn't aware of that yet, and they're kind of just protecting and rolling forward. And usually what happens is when people get into their 40s and 50s, maybe later, but usually 40s and 50s, you don't have the vital power to hold everything down anymore. And so the things like often people remember things from their early childhood in their 50s, that was blocked out their entire life. They had no recollection until like the strength of their vital body starts to transform, and there's more vulnerability. There's more sense of you can't really get out of it because your body can't fake it anymore. You can't just muscle your way through it or just think your head through it, because things start to fall apart. And still people, can be pretty stubborn and can kick that can into their 60s and 70s. But eventually you are forced to realize that you're part of a larger web, and that everything you love is going to be taken away from you. And what do you want to give? What do you want to give the people, your loved ones, your work, while you're here? And even though you're going to lose it. And that's a huge, huge thing to sit with, and not just close down and want to just give up, or not feel like somehow it's unfair. And yet it's what this realm is. And, I just had a daughter, a young daughter, and to see a little baby start to grow, and to see a baby turn into a kid and start grabbing things, and you see the developmental stage that should be, but somewhere along the line, the development stops, and people stay in that kind of teenage years rather than realizing that there's bigger playing fields. There's bigger playing fields beyond just money, power, sexuality. What about like devotion? What about something like a bigger, and those are still realms that you can play in. And it doesn't mean you leave the other ones behind, but you realize that there's infinitely larger things to pay attention to and to serve than just our own sense of me.
One of the things that I observe is within your work, it's really exploring the value of cultivating range, the importance of range, and
yes.
Exploring what is the aspect of me that is maybe overexpressed, or what's my default in the way that I operate, and what's the aspect of me that I've completely abdicated, put in the shadows, that's underexpressed, and really expanding that. I'm curious to hear if you can tell me more about the importance of that and the value.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's also passionate for me. And I think it's just a healthy as a human being to have range. And well, let's look at it this way. Like there's comfort zone does not equal range. If you stay within a certain bandwidth of comfort, you don't have to push too far into the thing that's your edge, or you don't have to try too hard to shine. You're just kind of there. And I mean, since we've been speaking about yoga, it's very similar. Like in yoga holds this well. So like if you love forward bends, and it's just like, oh, I love it. I can do forward bends all day long, but backward bends are hellish to you. It makes sense to develop your range so that you can do both. And the larger meaning of that, come back to what you're describing, is, and you can see that I'm continually holding the thread of what's out here in the room more than just what I want to do for my own comfort, me. So it comes back to that conversation. If I just worry about me, like, who cares? I can just play the same range, just hit the same note that works and walk into any room and just be the same exact person. And yet, when you begin to realize that your person impacts the joy, the beauty, the depth of any room you walk into, any person you can come into contact with, then if you want to become more of an artist, you have to develop range so that you can meet the moment that's actually happening. You can be in relationship, I like that word too, to life, rather than just this little closed circuit of just imposing myself on any situation and not noticing the impact of it. You walk in and you go, okay, does this need a strong, sharp, big, kind of more yang motion? Or do I actually pull my energy in and become quieter and not take the attention? And this is true in all domains. So even sexually, if you bring it back to, sexual polarity and sexual yoga, it's like, if you need to always be like the man in the room or the most beautiful woman in the room that everyone's looking at, then that's a very me oriented relationship to things. And the more mature sense of spectrum is you walk into a room and you don't necessarily, you're hanging out with let's say your husband's best friends. Do you really want to be do you want to like shine in a way that people are like distracted by you? Or do you want to just love these guys because they're great guys and they're your husband's best friends, or vice versa? And so it doesn't mean you shrink away, but little subtle yogic adaptations or little spectrums of bandwidth, you can still be just as radiant or just as conscious, but it doesn't need to like be focused in on someone. It's just true of who you are. And so like that little change in the action, the quiet, the loudness, the softness, the hardness. And while I'm on this, I wanted to say this earlier. I think that the sexual yoga piece, it really comes back to what I said in the beginning. It's a solo practice first. And at its most essential place for the masculine practitioner, which could be a male or a female, it doesn't matter. But if someone's practicing that, they're practicing, I am consciousness. I am opening this space through my presence. I am penetrating unclarity through my unwavering clarity. So there's this, you're doing that with reality, with the space around you. It's just, you are that. And as a female practitioner, you're practicing radiance, love, and being opened by life. So like everything is opening because it is, you're being penetrated by your breath, by your like the spark of life in your heart. So it's a very personal practice before you ever need to be able to turn to another person. That's the base. That's where it starts.
I'm like feeling into, okay, what are the threads that I really want to pull? There's
Got
so
you with
many.
that one, didn't I?
For sure, for sure. Yeah, like a few things kind of really stick out for me. I think I've become very passionate about this skill of expanding my range, because one of the things that I often got very caught into is trying to control myself, but also my circumstances and my environment. And one of the reasons that I found is because I didn't have the range to meet the moment in the way that it was asking me to meet it. And so I was moving through life with a sense of anxiety and vigilance. And for me, it, I felt like my window was very narrow. I wasn't able to fully go into the sharpness and the firmness and the fierceness that sometimes was demanded of me. But also, I was not really willing to go into the tenderness, the vulnerability, the like true fragility of life, and just at times like really be with the impact of grief and loss or whatever is like demanded of me. And so I find this one mode that I can operate in that works for me, and I try to move through life with that, but I found it to be very, very ineffective. And the more I was expanding on this range, the more I felt a sense of confidence, not because I knew what was going to happen, but because I knew I was able to meet whatever is going to happen. And so I was as well willing to meet the unknown on a much, much deeper level. So that's kind of like a comment on what you said. I actually wanted to throw you a bit of a curveball here, and I kind of feel called to ask you, what's the importance of play for men? Because within the dojo, we explored that quite a bit. You know, we explored it through, expressions of wildness and dance. I'm wondering what is here for you that you feel this is important for men to explore?
It's part of the spectrum. So if someone's only playing, then I would say let's focus more. But when it gets too rigid, it's time to play a little bit. So that's on that part of the conversation. It's just part of the spectrum. So there's all these apparent dualities, and realizing that those two are always in place, and then realizing more so that the life force or the Tao that comes through both of those sides, play and seriousness, is like that's another thread that you pay attention to. But play in general, it's partially because I need to play more. I can become serious, and it's easy to be a meditator and all, and as men, I think that's one of it. Sometimes it's genuine. Sometimes there is a sense of I am conscious and life is, dancing on you, or your girlfriend's, not happy with you just being conscious, and it's like, why, you're so serious, and that's an easy out for many men, is breathing and just be acting all serious, when really there's a fucking vulnerability, there's a sense of shame, or there's a sense of like play, like I just need to play and move those energies more. So I think I think it's really important for men to play in a way that's not just like little boys, to play as a grown man that can also be lethal. The next moment you can be lethal with your capacity, and then you can just roll over and play like two kittens together if you wanted to, like that's a beautiful sight. And that's also what you see if you look around you in nature, in any direction. Not as much play in nature, because there's a lot more urgency of like something's going to eat me. But if you look, most animals do show some signs of play, and some show a lot of beautiful senses of play. But even the spectrum of like a cat, the capacity to be totally playful, relaxed, and then pounce like a wild animal and just eat a bird, eat something. That's a healthy movement of life, just the same way that the sun's out and it's beautiful, and and then a storm comes and like tears trees up and lightning starts things on fire. So the nature of this place is dynamic with great range. And so if we want to somehow be in relationship to this great web, then we want to also be able to both navigate and interact with those forces, but also to be true to those same forces in our body. Because there's moments where, it's you need to play.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I recognize for myself, there's definitely a vulnerability with it. And I notice as well, a lot of the men that I speak to can definitely get lost in the demands and the burdens of life. And there's a seriousness that definitely settles in. And I see that as well with myself. But also there's a vulnerability because, like in my young ages specifically, I was a wild man. I was like fucking like all over, and I was clumsy, and I would like break things. And it feels like that part of me was like shamed out of me. And so I became a lot more like, rigid and a bit more vigilant and analytical and observant. But it still feels so incredibly innate for me to go into that when I have a permission field to do so. And like, even in those moments when, you would bring us into a particular practice, I notice this part of me that's like, fuck, I don't really want to do this. But like, as soon as I do it, and like 5 minutes after, I feel ecstatic and I feel joyful and I feel just much more connected. And there's something beautiful about, men coming together. And as you say, like not being like children, but like being mature adults who can just engage with each other in this way and tussle and like just bond in this way. And there's something incredibly nourishing about that.
Absolutely. I highly recommend it. And especially to men that have a very hard time playing and have a lot of judgment about it. And I'm not someone that plays that often, and I'm playing more now that I have a daughter and she's 6 months old. And I think my next many years are going to be beautifully full of kind of just a free invitation into play. But especially when you feel like, we don't have time for that. That's basically, I don't know if we can't really equate play to the feminine, because there's masculine play and there's feminine play. But there's something where, the really rigid masculine feels like play is just sort of like, self-care and like time off. Like that's just, like you don't have time for that. You have a mission to do. And certainly there are moments where you don't have time to play and you don't have time to take care of yourself. You've got something more important that you have to complete. But when you do complete that, like take a few breaths, like feel the joy of your own life. Otherwise, like, why do any of this stuff? Why live a purpose if you're not happy on some level? And so, and I don't mean gleeful happy, I mean just like grateful to be here. And I want to make a distinction between generative play and self-serving play, because that's important. Because there's play that kind of spirals you down. Like some people are like, well, I just want to play video games. That can be done in a generative way. Or I just want to play, and it's hurting other people, let's just say, in some way. Like your play impacts other people in a way that's not serving. It's leaving ripples in the room that you're not noticing, because you're having so much fun playing on your boat as you fly through, and like everyone gets thrown off their whatever they're doing. So that's the kind of play that's self-serving. And then in its deeper form, it spirals you down into more me and more sense of, I need something outside of myself in order to feel good. And then there's generative play, that you are playing in a way that makes other people want to play with you, or at least changes the tone in the room so people feel something different. Maybe it's not always up and happy. Maybe it's just deeper. Maybe your play is in a way that brings people into depth, and it's spiraling you up into a natural sense of joy and here-ness that you don't need all the shiny things. You still may choose them. You still may do all the same things, but there's not a craven sense of I need that, because you're in it. You're joyful
Right.
as it is.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I put as a note before our conversation is I wanted to hear your perspectives on like this contrast between adolescent behavior and more, I'm going to say, mature ways of operating. And I feel like you've, in many ways, already been touching and engaging into the answer of that, or at least your perspective in this conversation. And the things that really stood out for me has really been that it seems that, or appears to me, that adolescent behavior is a lot more about things being self-serving with no sense of regard of how I may be impacting another individual. There's a lot of external focus around what is it that I want and looking at how I can get it at all costs. Whereas more mature ways of operating, it seems like you leave that land behind where it's all about me, but actually observing a lot more. You didn't use those words, but I imagine it's something around the lines of how can I serve? How can I be a beneficiary of my environment? How can I be in contact with what's happening around me and be in relationship to them? So that sensitivity and that attunement towards what's going on, and leading in a relational way from that place seems very important.
I think that's well said. I would agree with what you're saying. And those are similar ways that I would refer to those words. And I want to add that there's a kind of a sharpness that I like to imply to adolescence. And so it's a natural stage of growth. It's healthy. But when it bleeds into a lifetime, just like any of these themes, it becomes unhealthy. It becomes you're hitting the same note endlessly. And one is not in relationship with the arc of life, which goes through stages, goes through the seed of birth as much as it goes through the last leaf falling and the last breath, and you're done. And so when we recognize that arc of time and honor it, there's a beauty in that. There's a beauty in older people that have surrendered their need to be young and actually take a seat in the sense of I've actually lived for some time and I've suffered, and let me tell you about it. Not from a sense of I know, but a sense of like, this is something that I learned. And and similar to like a plant or like the trees in autumn that are about to leave their leaves, they become beautiful. And there's something beautiful about going through that cycle, whether it's in a year or a lifetime. And so by saying, and people can become adolescent, it's a sharpness, it cuts, because nobody wants to be referred to as adolescent. People want to be young. They want to feel like youthful, let's say, and into their old years. And that's part of the marketplace that we spoke about in the beginning. When you have your root cut and you're basically following whatever someone puts in front of you, it's easy to manipulate someone and say, look, if you do this thing, take this testosterone, take this supplement, take this whatever, do this skin thing, and and those things can all be healthy done in the right way. There's nothing wrong with them inherently. But when there's a feeling of, I don't want to get old, I want this to go on endlessly. I want to live in like utopia forever, where it's only happy and strumming new age music. It's like, that's, there's a harsh wake up in that. And so how do we take our true seat at the age we are and honor what's truly happening to us? Invites other people into that. It invites other people into their experience of a soul that's being, expanded and then wrung out and then filled with life again, with love, and then broken with heartbreak, and then lifted up with something. And that whole process gets put into this little bandwidth where it's just like, wah, 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 wah. And life can be wah, wah, like huge, like massive spectrums of experience that are inherently terrifying. So I just want to say, first of all, that it's like, let's have a lot of compassion and understanding for anyone listening or anyone that hasn't been introduced to the idea. Why would you want to develop spectrum? Why would you want to be in the body? Why would you want to practice presence rather than just go make money? So like, let's have a lot of compassion, because there's both educational and there's the reason of it's, once you turn down that path, there's a certain demand on someone that chooses those. And so there's really there's a timing thing. Like eventually that spark will come on. And last thing I'd say about that is that the eventual part is that the more that we notice that there's the healthy moment is there's a pivot. So with making a lot of money, with self-help therapy, with training, eventually we would hope, like, yes, you focus on yourself, gather, train, heal. And then eventually there's a pivot where it's not about me anymore as much. I come back to myself and I train and I take care of myself. And so, yes, I still pay attention to myself, but there's a pivot towards, and this has been a theme throughout the whole thing, is what about the world? What about other beings? Like, how can I participate in this so that there's an accountability and a respect and a reverence for the pulse of my heartbeat? And yeah, there's people that will say, well, I don't have time for that. Like, I don't have time to do that. All I can say is that when we slow down, you will taste your life and you will experience your life with more deliciousness. There'll be much more of a richer experience of being here. And that takes both suffering and pleasure. It takes that spectrum you're talking to.
Mm. This feels like a beautiful time for us to transition a little bit into fatherhood. And if you're open to it, speaking a little bit more about the personal. And one thing that I was very drawn to ask you is, considering that you spend decades towards training and deeper mastery within yourself, I'm wondering, how has that supported or, I'm going to say impacted you as you now stepped into fatherhood? Has it helped you? Has it benefited you? Or is it like, oh shit, I'm like in the chaos of being a, father? Like what's that like?
Oh man. I mean, I'm a newbie, so I'm just been initiated, and that I know that the initiation doesn't stop. You just keep on going. And I know that I'm still suffering and all the variables that any new parent would, but like the same idea of we train and we practice so that we can step to the edge and lift our wings and fly into our life with a little more sensitivity to the way the wind feels, a little more sensitivity to the cry of my baby, as much as the laughter and the smiles. But I still get, pulled through it. And I'm grateful that I've trained for many, many years. And, it's all coming to bear. Like I can't imagine, going through what my partner and I are going through without having some sense of breath and presence and heart. And I'm just grateful to be able to pass that on, to be able to create a safe environment where her nervous system is just felt and regulated regularly. And there's all kinds of body contact and skin time. And like, I really can, it's not easy. Like, I still have things to do. And there's times I want to pick up my phone. I want to keep doing all the things, but I realize that this is precious. This moment, you really get to see it with a child. I mean, every moment's precious. You could say that about every moment of your life. It's like, wow, this moment's happening. But when you have something in front of you that you're seeing grow like day by day, there's a different kind of urgency that is, you're invited and demanded into it. And so I just fall and fly right into this moment. And I'm so grateful to be at this stage, at this point in my life. And having all the training I have, I still have lots of moments where it's like, how do I deal with this? And I'm sure there's going to be moments of vulnerability. I've spoken about this before, that I think it serves especially men to become a father, to feel that something around their guard of their heart crack open. And so something that takes a little time, but most men, when you're holding this little being that you realize is totally vulnerable to life, and I'm sure it gets even more intense as she gets older and she goes off to school and she goes on her first date and all these things where it's like, you can't control it. You got to just let it go, let her go.
Yeah.
and let her go through her own process of being shaped by her life experience. And so there's a real vulnerability in that is both delicious and excruciating in moments.
It's beautiful to hear you speak about that. And this interview that I heard of you, that was recently brought out, where you were a guest, one thing that you said really stuck out for me, which was, you spoke about this freedom that you feel around responsibility. I would love to hear more about that, because responsibility for a lot of men especially can initially appear very burdening. So I'm one, and there is this drive, especially, I mean, I still feel it myself, frankly, this longing for freedom, this deeper freedom, in all kinds of different expressions. And I want to hear more about how this responsibility that you feel, and you not being able to, let's say, abdicate your post as a father, how that there's a freedom that you feel with that.
I mean, it's part of this conversation of spectrum. And so work, play, freedom, responsibility, they're opposite ends of like that one form we've done, where one hand's freedom, one hand's responsibility. Or I often work with bamboo staffs in some of the trainings I do, and one end of the stick is freedom. You can do things with it. You can play. The other end of the stick is responsibility, because if you're not paying attention, you can hit someone and injure somebody. So there's always this sense of freedom and responsibility. And that is another way of looking at maturity, because the adolescent part of us only wants to play. It hasn't really learned that there's the more responsibility you're able to hold, the more wild you can play. And that they've got to be connected. And I would say ecstasy and responsibility also go together. Like your capacity to be ecstatic and free, unless you're like high on drugs or just, adolescently cruising around. And there's moments to do that. There's been definitely moments to just take off and cruise around the world. And there's moments to go to ceremonies, but there's got to be a level of responsibility of actually integrating that and live, like holding true to it, honoring what you've experienced. And then that allows that to go wider and deeper. So you go deeper into responsibility. And that's where you have to be awake to do that, because too much responsibility done from what you were talking about, where there's the part of many of all of us feels like, oh, responsibility is a burden. Yeah, it is. It is a burden. But if we only stay in responsibility, then you become just like a machine that forgets how to play. It forgets about the freedom of that. And it just becomes like a tuck, 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 tuck. Or someone that's just only up here in the playing, it becomes like just like the wind.
Yeah, really beautifully put. And I mean, I guess one of the reasons why as well I'm asking is because I'm navigating on a personal level. I feel in many ways that, especially over the last 2 to 3 years, I've really been called and asked into responsibility, especially I'm going to say the last 6 months very deeply, because I'm recognizing, whoa, there's something here that I want to bring to the world. I want to serve. I want to help other individuals, and I want to create some form of impact and live out a sense of purpose, and there is a responsibility that comes with that, and it can feel incredibly scary to the part of me that longs for freedom. I mean, especially I think I had the great fortune in my young 20s to really step away from, let's say kind of like the linear way of living life and explore more like nomadic ways of living and backpacking and just exploring. And, I kind of describe it a little bit like my Peter Pan phase. And I don't see it as something, that I shame myself for. I think I needed that to really unwind as well, all these ways where I felt so domesticated and so captivated in my expression. And I needed that time to really discover who I really am and really come into connection with myself. And that was really, really important. But there really came a clear transition where I was like, all right, enough of that, Alex. It's time to really go out and see how you can serve other people with this.
Here's the piece I want to just add to it is when one chooses the responsibility and you actually choose it, it's different than when you feel like responsibility is put on you or you're forced into something that you're not really choosing. The responsibility of a job that you don't really care about, it's not what you believe in, but you're still responsible. Fulfill your commitment. That's a healthy thing to do, but that can become oppressive. But when you choose into something, I want to build this company, and its responsibility is intense, but it's like I believe in it, or I want to have a child. And then you feel like, oh, the burden of that. Yeah, it's you lose freedom for quite some time, but I chose that. And I chose that because I knew that my soul needed to go through that experience, and it's going to shave away layers of my old persona. I already feel that there's parts of who I was as a man that have died, and there's a new man that's kind of appearing with this demand for, responsibility. And even this year is the first year in over 20 years that I haven't been able to go on a solitary retreat. Every year, 20 years, 10 days, 15 days alone in the middle of nowhere and just deep in it. And that's been one of my joys and deep passions. And that's been an anchor. It's been a thread in my life. That's not possible this year. And yet, I take that with a smile and a sense of whatever I'm involved in warrants that, and I chose it. And so that's the maturity, is I chose it, so I'm going to show up instead of wanting to get out. And that's I think that can be the issue when people have kids too early. If they haven't developed some of those capacities, it can become a burden that you just want to get out of and escape. And that's the adolescent part of us doesn't realize it has the responsibility of something larger than your own needs. And in a lot of cultures, that's all there is. The ancient cult, even in the indigenous cultures, a lot of the world now, it's not about what you want. there's even in the East, it's more oriented in that way. It's like, it's about the responsibilities to the family, to the community, to being a part of a larger web. And not the West is an individuality thing, and they both have their gifts, but it's the whole world's not focused on that.
Really, very beautiful distinction and very powerful distinction, and one that, definitely I as well at times can forget that there's a sense of choice, and sometimes I feel like I lose that, and then I feel like, oh, I have to do this thing, and then that's when it feels disempowering. It feels sticky. But when that sense of like recognition comes, I chose this. I'm doing this because I wanted to do this. Then it actually feels empowering. Eli, I want to honor your time and want to slowly start to wind down the conversation. One thing that I really couldn't help but want to ask you as we wind down the conversation, as this is something that personally deeply interested me, is I'm aware that you trained and as well worked alongside David Data for many years, for 8 years, from my understanding. And he in many ways is kind of like one of the people who first brought out this field of the yoga of intimacy and sexual yoga. And I felt this calling just to ask you, what did you learn through those years of working with David? And like, what is one thing that you really took away from that experience that perhaps could be beneficial to any listeners?
Gosh. I mean, first of all, just complete gratitude to David and to all the teachers that have touched me. I've been graced by meeting and have shaped me and schooled me and inspired me in various ways. If specifically David Data, I would say the embodiment piece was one of the first things I learned there. And that was a huge component of, if it's not living in the body, it's a good idea. And so the importance of the physical body, and then I've learned and taken that in different directions, but that initial spark of it, and then along with that, the lesson that you're either opening or you're closing the body, the heart, the mind, the spirit, and moment to moment, yogically practicing to open the antenna, meet life, be in relationship with your woman, with the difficulties of work, with the beautiful rain falling on you, whatever it is, like to actually be open and meeting it, even if it's excruciating or scary. Like, there's times to protect yourself if something's coming at you, but otherwise, like, the more you can let your front surface relax and meet the pulse of life, to breathe with life, it's a different journey. It's a different life journey, and people feel you differently. Your partner won't feel you as like just breathing, protecting yourself and trying to be present and maintain a certain posture of I'm present. It's like, no, like, let that go. Like, what about the softness of your own face as you feel the strength of your spine? And so I could keep riffing for a very long time about all the things, and I still, I'm served by them. And I think, course of a lifetime, you grow and you refine and you realize some things don't fit you anymore. And how do you shed that and find your own way? And then the core pieces you honor in ways, and you keep honoring them and growing them, and you turn back to them. But there's certain things that don't fit anymore. And and so that's a healthy process. But body and opening, closing, like whatever's happening to you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And if the listeners hear, just hearing these words that Eli said, if you really just reflect on them and explore those and apply those in your life, I mean, that is a practice that you can, really work with, for the rest of your life ultimately. So just really want to name as well the value in what Eli speaks to. Do you want to say something?
Yeah, ultimately, Alex, it is a lifelong practice, and on your deathbed, like being able to open and thank your loved ones, whether it's a fast thing or whether it's like a drawn out thing. Like imagine being able to go out and with an open disposition. So it's a spiritual practice. And then there's all kinds of traditions that believe that then that brings you into different bardos and different realms, depending on how you go out, and how you meet that moment impacts your future. So, but who knows about the future? All I know about is now. And I know that every moment, the more open I meet with, life responds.
Mm.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, before I part you with our closing question, I first of all just want to take a moment just to acknowledge you, Eli, first of all, for coming on the podcast and like sharing all this wisdom and all these insights. And I strongly believe that there is going to be a transmission of the depth and presence and the embodiment that you really work through for many years. And just being in your container the last 3 months, every time I stepped into the dojo, there was something special. And it always felt like there was a demand of sharpening of my own consciousness, of my own presence, of my own depth, of my own embodiment. And I thank you for that, and I really see, that you're a teacher and mentor here for me in many ways. And, I see that this isn't the end. This is just the beginning. And I'm very, very grateful for everything that I got to learn from you.
Yeah. It's been an honor, truly.
Where can our listeners find you? And if, in case there's any offerings that you would like to speak into, bring the listeners an awareness of, I would love to give you a moment for that.
My website is eliburen.com, and you'll find whatever's happening there. I will be offering another dojo starting in September. So that's going to be another real journey. And come find me in person too. And you included, Alex, because in person in the room is a whole nother experience. I mean, we can do a lot here virtually, but when I can feel your body and you can feel my body, and there's just a transmission that happens traditionally that's can't really happen if you don't get yourself into the same room. And not that I'm some enlightened spiritual person transmitting, I'm not saying that, but even just watching someone train martial arts or learning a kind of a music from someone, to feel their body and their spirit that's actually happening in the moment, there's a great lesson in that.
Yeah. And man, I would absolutely love to experience your work in person, and just the experience or retreat in Zion. I mean, it just looks fabulous and amazing. And if I wasn't on the whole other side of the world, I would definitely be up for it, and I'd be so down for it. But I believe it'll have to wait for the future. Know that I'll most likely be in the dojo in autumn in case anything else is there that I have to attend to. But I'm already feeling the calling for that. So just appreciate the work. I hope to as well see you in Bali whenever that does come. And if you ever feel the calling to be back here, and know I'm the first one to sign up for any thing that you bring out as an offering. Beautiful, Eli. Well, just to close off, I want to give you a moment just to give you the space to address anything that I may have not asked you that you feel like you wanted to share or impart as wisdom, or if there is any message, I would love to give you a moment or two for that.
I feel like we've covered it for the most part. I would just simply add that in our practice of development and developing skill sets and understandings, spend some time in the more subtle, quiet dimensions that in the spectrum may not seem so bright and sexy and wow, big experiences, but look for those little quieter moments where you can just rest into and it doesn't seem like that much is happening. And there's a lot there in those transitional moments. There's a lot there in the subtleness of the way the air touches your skin right now. And the more that we're nourished by those little moments of the way the light's coming through the trees onto your face, there's less need to consume. There's less need to go out and get this thing. And then when you do that, it's coming from more of a resourced body. And it's coming from the place we've been talking about, where it's like you're actually going out to caress that thing, not to just grab it and own it. So yeah, I'll leave it with that note.
Yep. Beautiful place to close it out. Thank you, Eli, for coming on.
Yeah.
For all the listeners who dropped in, if you're still listening here, thank you for giving us your time and attention, and I hope you as well got a lot of value out of this conversation. In case you have any questions or would like to just share the impact of this conversation, I will make sure as well to share in the show notes both of our contacts, so you can reach out to both of us. And until next time, signing off. Thank you for listening to this episode. Your time and attention is truly appreciated. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe to stay tuned for my upcoming episodes. And in case you know somebody who would find this episode helpful, I encourage you to pay it forward. Finally, if you've personally been receiving value from the show, one way you're able to support this podcast is by leaving a 5-star rating and a written review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Not only does this help more people find the show, but it also supports me in bringing more incredible guests on for the future. I'm your host, Alex Lehman, and until next time, signing off.